Why did every conversation on the tarmac die the second she stepped off the helicopter? The Black Hawk's rotors chopped the desert sky, flinging hot wind and grit across the landing pad. Staff Sergeant Sophia Chun ducked under the blades and stepped down, boots crunching on sun-baked concrete. Her pack rode high on her shoulders, straps cinched tight, every movement precise, economical. She paused just long enough to scan the compound. Concrete barracks ringed by razor wire, sniper towers like silent watchmen, and beyond them, an endless stretch of canyon and sky. 12 Navy SEALs stood outside the hangar. Conversations halted mid-sentence, laughter strangled in their throats. Tank Rodriguez, their unofficial alpha built like a linebacker, let a slow grin spread across his face. His voice carried in the wind. "Great. They sent us Barbie with a rifle." The chuckles that followed weren't light-hearted. They were cutting, sharp as broken glass. Sophia didn't flinch. She let her eyes pass over them, brief, cool, unreadable, and kept walking. The desert wind whipped her braid against her cheek as if testing her resolve. Chief Petty Officer Miguel Ramirez watched from the command building's doorway, arms folded across a chest weathered by 20 years of deployments. He'd seen plenty of cocky recruits and quiet killers, but something about this assignment felt off. Orders had come from higher than he could reach. "Rodriguez," he called, voice flat. "Show our guest to her quarters." Tank swaggered forward, towering over Sophia's 5'4" frame. "Right this way, princess. Hope you brought your teddy bear. Gets real scary out here at night." Laughter bubbled behind him, the kind that thrives on a shared target. They walked past the main barracks, air-conditioned, clean, humming with fluorescent light, to an auxiliary building that smelled faintly of dust and motor oil. Tank kicked open a converted storage room. A narrow cot, a metal locker, a flickering bulb. The single window faced west, guaranteeing blistering afternoons. Tank swept an exaggerated hand toward the cot. "5-star accommodations for our VIP." He peered into the corner bathroom and smirked. "Shared with the maintenance crew. Don't worry, princess. If you get lonely, we're just a scream away." The other SEALs, Deadeye Morrison, Martinez, Jackson, clustered in the hallway, trading jokes about diversity quotas and political correctness gone tactical. Their voices were knives, honed to test her skin. Sophia set her pack down without a word. When she asked for her assigned weapon, they handed her a battered M24. The stock was chipped, the scope cracked, the barrel scarred by neglect. Morrison stroked his pristine rifle like a beloved pet. "Sorry about the hand-me-down," he said with mock sympathy. "But hey, a real sniper can make anything work, right?" More laughter. Sophia's fingers brushed the rifle's rough edges, her expression unreadable. But her trained touch felt every flaw they'd ignored or dismissed. A loose trigger mechanism, a tilted reticle that would ruin long-range accuracy, a damaged crown that would scatter rounds unpredictably. She nodded once, calm. "It'll do." The sun sank, and the compound's noise dimmed to murmurs and clinking poker chips. While the SEALs gathered in their lounge, Sophia slipped into the quiet armory. A single desk lamp cast a yellow pool of light across a scarred workbench. She sat, rolled up her sleeves, and began to work. Piece by piece, she stripped the rifle, bolt assembly, firing pin, extractor. Her movements were careful, deliberate, almost reverent. The smell of gun oil mixed with desert dust. Sergeant Walsh, the grizzled Marine armorer, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. He watched her for a long time before speaking. "You know what you're doing." Sophia didn't look up. "My grandfather was a gunsmith, taught me when I was 8. She lifted the firing pin toward the light. A hairline crack ran down its length. This was going to misfire. Walsh raised an eyebrow. The SEALs had complained about that rifle for months but never investigated. He stepped closer, curiosity edging into respect. "Most folks just curse at it and grab another." "He taught me better," she said simply. She worked for hours. Walsh found himself lingering, first out of duty, then fascination, As she replaced the damaged pin, filed the crown, tightened the scope mount, and measured tolerances by feel. Her hands were steady, her brow furrowed in quiet focus. "Why'd you even take this assignment?" Walsh asked finally. Sophia hesitated, fingers pausing over the trigger assembly. "Because sometimes you don't get to choose where you prove yourself." The answer hung in the air, heavier than any desert heat. By midnight the rifle had transformed, a precision instrument reborn from neglect. The action cycled smooth as silk, the trigger broke clean as glass, and her hand-loaded rounds waited in neat rows, each tailored for the dry, thin air outside. Walsh locked the armory, shaking his head. "Those boys don't know what they're dealing with." Sophia smiled faintly, though it didn't touch her eyes. The flickering bulb cast long shadows on the walls, stretching her silhouette into something taller, stronger, older than her years. She whispered, barely audible, "Tomorrow, they'll start to learn." Outside, the desert wind whistled through Devil's Canyon, rattling the razor wire. Somewhere beyond the dark ridgelands, a coyote's call echoed, a lonely, defiant sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. Sophia slipped the rebuilt rifle onto her shoulder and stepped back into the night, her boots silent on the gravel. She paused, looking west toward the mountains, and in her mind heard her grandfather's voice. "The mountain doesn't care about your pride, little wolf. Make it speak to you, or it will break you." Her heartbeat slowed. The wind tugged at her braid like an old friend testing her resolve. And for the first time since stepping off the Black Hawk, Sophia allowed herself a single, small breath of anticipation. Tomorrow wasn't about proving the SEALs wrong. It was about honoring every lesson whispered on Montana ridges, every late-night vigil with a battered rifle, every quiet belief that skill mattered more than swagger. She turned toward the dim glow of the barracks, the laughter still faintly audible. Her steps were measured, deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. She would let them laugh a little longer. The desert, the canyon, and the wind would speak for her soon enough. How far could pride carry them before the canyon broke them? The stars still burned over the desert when Chief Ramirez's voice cut through the chill like a blade. 15 miles, full combat load, Devil's Canyon, anyone falls behind gets recycled, no exceptions. Frosted breath ghosted from his lips. It was barely 500, but the desert would be a furnace by noon. The SEALs stood in formation, armor plates already strapped tight, rifles slung, hydration packs full. Tank rolled his shoulders and hoisted his 80-pound pack with theatrical ease. "Hope you stretched, princess," he smirked. "This isn't a Sunday hike." Sophia adjusted her straps in silence, the weight of her pack, a near 100 pounds on her smaller frame, biting into her shoulders. She'd been underestimated before, in Afghanistan, on Montana ridges, even by herself in sleepless nights. But something about the canyon air, crisp and razor-edged, felt like an old friend daring her to prove she belonged. They started fast, too fast. Tank set a punishing pace across the flat desert floor, long legs eating ground at nearly 6 miles per hour. The SEALs fell in behind him, a machine of synchronized strides and steady breathing. The strategy was obvious: break her early, let the terrain finish her off. Sophia matched their cadence, boots whispering over the sand. Her lungs burned but held steady. Years of running mountain trails at high altitude had carved her endurance into something resilient, almost stubborn. Her grandfather's voice flickered again in memory. "Don't fight the mountain. Learn its rhythm. Let it teach you where to step." By mile 3, the first hints of sunrise brushed the canyon walls pink and gold. The temperature jumped 10 degrees in minutes. Tank glanced over his shoulder, expecting her to lag, but she was there, eyes forward, stride measured. He picked up speed. The canyon narrowed, its walls towering overhead, and the route turned punishing. Loose shale slid underfoot. Rocks jutted like broken teeth. A tumble here meant shattered bones or worse. Jackson stumbled once, cursed under his breath, and righted himself. Sophia moved like water over stone, nimble and precise. "Spider," Jackson muttered to Deadeye, watching her slip across a near-vertical section without hesitation. Deadeye grunted, "Mountain goat." By mile 5, Tank's breath had grown heavier. Sweat soaked his uniform. The desert sun rose higher, baking the canyon floor into a crucible. The SEALs kept their formation tight, but glances flicked toward Sophia, half disbelief, half grudging respect. Then came the climb. 1,000-foot ascent up the north wall, a test that broke strong men. Tank attacked it with brute force, muscles straining, boots scraping for purchase. The others followed, grunting and hauling themselves upward. Sophia paused at the base, scanning the rock face. She didn't rush. She found handholds others had missed, shifted her weight with precision, and climbed efficiently, conserving energy where the men wasted it. Halfway up, Tank slipped on loose rock and barely caught himself. He swore under his breath but said nothing. When Sophia passed him with quiet grace, she didn't gloat. She didn't even look at him. That, somehow, stung worse. At the summit, Tank collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. Sweat dripped from his jaw. Sophia checked her watch, adjusted her pack straps, and drank sparingly. Her breathing was controlled, her pulse steady. She scanned the horizon as though the climb had been a warm-up. "Is she not dying?" Deadeye whispered, too winded to joke. The final 7 miles wound through Devil's Canyon's maze of twisting paths, the heat now brutal. The temperature climbed past 100. Thermal currents shimmered on the horizon. Some SEALs began stumbling, the telltale signs of heat exhaustion creeping in, slowed reflexes, unsteady gaits. Sophia kept her pace. Once she quietly handed her canteen to Martinez without breaking stride. He drank greedily, glanced at her, and saw not pity in her eyes but simple, wordless solidarity. By the time they reached the finish line, Tank collapsed theatrically under a patch of shade. Others sprawled on the ground, groaning. Sophia walked to the water station, methodically drank, then began checking her gear for the afternoon's drills. Chief Ramirez approached, expression unreadable but voice softer than before. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" "Montana backcountry," Sophia replied simply. "You learn to cover ground efficiently, or you don't eat." Ramirez gave a single nod, as if filing away information he hadn't expected to need. He watched her walk back toward her quarters, rifle balanced on her shoulder like an extension of her body. For the first time, doubt flickered, not about her, but about what exactly command had sent him. The sun arced higher, baking the compound. The afternoon live-fire exercise promised more chances to humiliate her, or to expose something none of them had seen coming. By 1400, the shooting range shimmered under the desert glare. Targets dotted the horizon at distances from 300 to 800 meters. The wind gusted unpredictably, tugging at flags and whipping dust into small tornadoes. They gave Sophia the worst position, directly into the sun with crosswinds twisting sideways. Tank and Deadeye lingered nearby, confident the conditions would expose her as out of her depth. "Ladies first," Tank called, feigning gallantry. Sophia settled behind her rebuilt rifle, her movements minimal, efficient. No showy rituals, no exaggerated calculations. She simply watched, the grass bending in gusts, the shimmer of heat on the horizon, the subtle shifts in pressure. Her breathing slowed. 5 rounds cracked the air in quick succession, precise, measured. Through the spotting scope, the range officer's voice came over the radio. 5 rounds, same hole, perfect score. The laughter died. Tank muttered, "Lucky shots," but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The distances increased. 700 meters, 800. The wind grew wilder. Sophia adjusted once, maybe twice, and repeated the impossible, tight groups, dead center. The men exchanged glances. Deadeye's jaw flexed. For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Close quarters combat training followed, and the SEALs found their footing again. This was their domain, brute strength, brutal technique. Tank volunteered to demonstrate, eyes glinting with the promise of a comeback. He wrapped her in a crushing bear hug from behind. "Now, princess, when someone grabs you like this." He never finished. Sophia dropped her weight, pivoted, and used his momentum against him. The judo throw was perfect, flawless form, fluid motion. Tank's 240 pounds hit the mat with a thunderous crash. The room went silent except for the echo. Tank stared at the ceiling, stunned. The others stood frozen, their smirks erased. Sophia adjusted her uniform calmly, waiting. Chief Ramirez broke the silence. "Where'd you learn that?" His tone was different now, curious, almost respectful. "My grandfather," she said. "He fought in World War II. Said a soldier should fight with everything, guns, knives, hands, and mind." The betting pool, how long until she quit, quietly dissolved. Later that night, as the SEALs nursed bruised egos over cards and beer, Tank stared into his drink. Deadeye broke the silence. "She's not here for diversity points, Tank. You felt that throw." Tank said nothing, but a part of him, the part that had mocked, began to wonder if the story of this assignment would end the way they expected. Outside, the desert cooled under a sky littered with stars. Sophia sat alone near the edge of the compound, rifle across her lap, tracing constellations her grandfather once pointed out. The wind whispered through Devil's Canyon, carrying old lessons and new challenges. She closed her eyes and let the desert speak. Tomorrow would bring new tests, and somewhere far away, a man named Halil al-Rashid, a ghost they'd been chasing for years, was already living his last days without knowing it. Why wasn't the wind, the sun, or the pressure breaking her focus? The next morning's sky burned bright, cloudless, and merciless. By 800, the compound's concrete walls already radiated heat. Sophia woke early, long before reveille, her body moving through quiet stretches and slow, deliberate breathing. Her rebuilt rifle rested on the table beside her, its metal cool against her fingertips. She ran her palm along the smooth action, testing the bolt, silent, perfect. Outside, footsteps crunched, the SEALs heading for breakfast. Their voices, distant and muted, carried a new undercurrent, not just mockery now, but something quieter, curiosity, maybe unease. By mid-morning, they gathered on the long-range range again. Ramirez stood with his arms folded, his face half in shadow beneath his cap brim. Today wasn't a test on paper, it was a test of pride. The desert winds had shifted overnight, carving invisible rivers of air through Devil's Canyon. Even the seasoned shooters looked wary. Deadeye crouched beside his sleek .338 Lapua, eyes narrowed against the glare. Tank made a show of stretching his shoulders, muscles rippling. Martinez tapped his rangefinder nervously. The targets gleamed far downrange, some so distant they shimmered like ghosts in the heat. "Today's about consistency under chaos," Ramirez said. His voice was low but carried authority. "No excuses, no lucky streaks." His gaze flicked to Sophia. Tank grinned broadly. "Ladies first, as always." Sophia stepped forward without comment. She didn't perform the elaborate pre-shot rituals the others had perfected. No exaggerated wind readings, no overblown calculations. Instead, she lay prone, adjusted her cheek weld, and watched. The grass bending under gusts, heat mirages dancing. The subtle sway of a target stand with each breeze. Her breathing slowed. The first 5 rounds cracked like lightning. Through the spotting scope, Martinez blinked. 5 rounds, same hole, dead center. The range officer's voice confirmed it over the radio, a faint disbelief threading through his professional tone. Perfect score. Behind her, Deadeye muttered something under his breath. Tank's forced chuckle sounded brittle. Distances, meters, then 800. The wind gusted unpredictably, changing vectors without warning. Sophia adjusted her hold only slightly, her body steady, her trigger pull smooth. Each shot landed tight. When her last round punched through the bullseye, even Deadeye lowered his rifle for a beat. The air felt thinner. "Lucky streak," Tank said, but he didn't meet anyone's eyes. Ramirez spoke softly, as though to himself, "Or preparation meeting opportunity." Close quarters drills followed. Sweat slicked every surface. The sun was a hammer, the mat a furnace. Tank sought a rematch. "Let's try that again, princess," he growled, stepping onto the mat. Sophia's lips curved barely. "If you're sure." He lunged, faster and angrier than before. She flowed around him, sidestep, pivot, leverage. The world seemed to slow as she redirected his momentum. He hit the mat harder than yesterday, the impact echoing through the training hall. Deadeye let out a low whistle. Jackson muttered, "That wasn't luck." Tank stared up at the ceiling, breath ragged, a flush of embarrassment creeping across his face. This time Sophia extended her hand. He hesitated, then took it. Her grip was strong but not gloating, simply steady. The gesture lodged somewhere deep in Tank's chest, an unfamiliar discomfort. Respect. Later, during a hydration break, Ramirez approached her quietly. "You don't showboat." "Why would I?" she replied, sipping water. "Because most people would, after that." He jerked his chin toward Tank, who sat nursing bruised pride. Sophia's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Showboating doesn't make the mountain respect you." Ramirez studied her, the way her shoulders stayed relaxed even under scrutiny. He'd led enough missions to know competence when he saw it, but there was something else in her, the way she spoke of the mountain, as if it were alive. He wondered again what command wasn't telling him. That night the SEALs gathered in the common room. The card game ran quieter than usual. Tank kept glancing toward the auxiliary building where Sophia's small window glowed faintly. Martinez broke the silence first. "You ever seen anyone handle wind like that?" Deadeye shook his head slowly. "Not like that." Tank tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "It's just luck, has to be." "Luck doesn't throw you twice in 2 days," Jackson muttered. Meanwhile, Sophia sat cross-legged on her cot, rifle disassembled beside her, the desert breeze slipping through her cracked window. She wasn't thinking about their doubts or even her small victories. She thought about Halil al-Rashid, the bomb maker whose name had come up in her whispered orders. She thought about the embassy attack in Kabul and the faces she'd never forget. She had questions she couldn't ask. Why this compound? Why these men? Why now? Ramirez's unease mirrored her own. She closed her eyes, recalling her grandfather's hands guiding hers on a rifle stock decades ago. "Patience, little wolf. A rifle is just a tool. Your mind makes it deadly. Your heart decides why." Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the razor wire like distant applause or warning. The next day would bring answers, or at least more questions. The canyon waited, patient and unyielding. Somewhere far off, Halil al-Rashid moved unseen, his routine unbroken, unaware that a shot was already waiting for him on a distant mountaintop. But Sophia couldn't shake a gnawing thought. What if this wasn't just about testing skill? What if command had sent her here for something deeper, a choice, a reckoning, a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to learn? The wind whispered through the compound, carrying a promise only she seemed to hear. The mountain doesn't care about pride. It doesn't care about politics or prejudice. But tomorrow it might reveal its secrets to those who listen. Sophia lay down beside her rifle, the desert moon painting silver lines across her face. Sleep came slowly, tangled with memories and a quiet, building sense of inevitability. Something was coming. Something that would demand everything she had learned and everything she believed. What mission could demand the impossible? The dawn briefing room was colder than the desert outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their hum the only sound before Chief Ramirez entered with a folder clutched tight under his arm. The SEALs leaned casually against the walls at first, coffee cups, smirks, the easy arrogance of men who'd seen everything. But Ramirez's expression erased their bravado. He laid a satellite photo on the table. Grainy mountains, a fortress-like compound carved into stone, narrow valleys like veins around a heart. "We have a high-value target," Ramirez said, voice steady but sharp. "Halil al-Rashid, the bomb maker behind the Kabul embassy attacks." Silence, even Tank stopped tapping his mug. Intel places him here. Ramirez pointed to a tiny speck on a distant ridgeline, 2,200 meters from the nearest observation point. Air strikes are off the table, too many civilians in the valley. This is a live op, gentleman and staff sergeant. His eyes flicked toward Sophia. The distance settled on them like a weight, 2,200 meters, nearly a mile and a half, beyond the effective range of even their best rifles. Deadeye exhaled slowly, already running ballistics in his mind. Chief, the wind patterns through that valley are a nightmare. Crosswinds, thermals, that's threading a needle in a hurricane. Tank whistled low, that's suicide. Ramirez's jaw tightened. Command wants to know if this unit can handle the impossible. Everyone will attempt the shot. Consider it both evaluation and operation. Sophia said nothing, her gaze fixed on the satellite image. She traced the ridgeline with her eyes, seeing not just terrain but the way wind would wrap and twist around it. The SEALs began preparations. On the firing platform carved into the cliffside, spotting scopes lined up like watchful eyes. Barretts and Lapuas gleamed under the harsh sunlight. Each man meticulously calibrated his scope, loaded custom rounds, and ran calculations on ruggedized tablets. The air was thick with tension disguised as banter. Deadeye went first, years of impossible shots behind him. He spent 20 minutes reading wind currents, adjusting for temperature and altitude. His rifle cracked. The bullet struck nearly a foot and a half off target, close, but in combat terms meaningless. Tank tried next, brute force in the form of a .50 cal Barrett. His shot sailed high, caught by an updraft. He cursed under his breath. One by one, they all missed. Even Ramirez's own round, a product of decades of experience, hit low and left. The laughter that followed was thin and bitter. Pride was crumbling under physics. Then every eye turned to Sophia. Tank smirked, but the edge of doubt showed. Your turn, princess. Show us how the army does fairy tale-ese. Sophia didn't rise to the bait. She studied the valley, the wind tugging her braid against her neck. She watched the distant flag atop the compound whip and stutter. Slowly, she pulled a small, weathered notebook from her vest and began to write formulas, observations, subtle notes that looked almost like poetry. She's writing her diary, Martinez muttered, but his laugh was half-hearted. She ignored them. The desert had its own language, and she was listening. Every gust of wind was a syllable, every flicker of dust a clue. She mapped the rhythm, gusts every 90 seconds, a brief lull every fourth cycle. She measured temperatures at different altitudes, barometric pressure shifts, even the Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation tugging the bullet's path ever so slightly. Minutes passed, the SEAL's restlessness grew. Tank tapped his boot impatiently. Jackson checked his watch. Ramirez, though, watched her differently now. He'd seen snipers freeze under pressure, but this wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. And something else, respect for the mountain. Sophia's fingers brushed the rifle's stock like a violinist testing strings. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, "Patience, little wolf." But she didn't take the shot yet. Instead, she closed the notebook and stepped back. "Not yet," she said quietly. Deadeye frowned. "What do you mean, not yet? The window?" She glanced toward the distant ridge. "The mountain's not ready to speak." Her words hung in the dry air, strange and unsettling. The SEALs shifted uneasily. Tank opened his mouth, then closed it. They packed up for the evening without the catharsis of a clean shot. Back at the compound, the mood was restless. Pride bruised, doubt creeping in. Tank slammed his locker shut. "She's stalling, she doesn't have the guts." Deadeye didn't answer. He'd watched her earlier, the way her eyes tracked the wind like a hawk tracking prey. Stalling wasn't what he'd seen. In her small, sweltering quarters, Sophia sat by the window, the desert night spilling stars across the sky. Her grandfather's voice echoed again. "The mountain doesn't care about your schedule. Wait for its breath." She thought about Kabul, the smoke, the screaming, the embassy courtyard, and the faces she'd promised herself she wouldn't forget. Halil al-Rashid wasn't just a name on a file. He was a ghost she'd carried quietly for years. Sleep didn't come easily. Outside, the wind hissed through Devil's Canyon, carrying secrets only those who listened could hear. At 200 she rose, dressed silently, and walked to the cliff's edge. The valley below stretched in silver moonlight, quiet and endless. She closed her eyes and breathed. The gusts ebbed and surged. She felt their rhythm like a heartbeat. She whispered to the darkness, not expecting an answer, "Show me." A gentle breeze caressed her face, then stilled. In that stillness she understood the timing, the cycle, the window, a narrow corridor of calm amid chaos. She returned to her cot, lay down beside her rifle, and let the desert's whispers fade into dreams. Tomorrow the seals would try again, and tomorrow so would she. But as she drifted towards sleep, a new thought gnawed at her. Maybe this wasn't just a test of physics or pride. Maybe command had chosen her because ghosts like Halil al-Rashid weren't the only ones who needed reckoning. Maybe the mountain would ask a price she hadn't considered. Outside, a lone coyote called. Somewhere far to the east, Halil al-Rashid stepped onto a balcony for his nightly routine, unaware that fate had already taken aim. Why did the mountain seem alive, watching, waiting? Morning sunlight spilled across Devil's Canyon like molten gold, but the wind had already turned hostile. Dust devils danced between boulders, and the observation deck shimmered like a mirage across the valley. The seals moved with a tense efficiency, checking bolts, wiping lenses, adjusting bipods, but their pride was cracked, and cracks made men careful. Ramirez set up the spotting scope, his weathered hand steady despite the chill creeping into his gut. Deadeye knelt nearby, tablet balanced on his knee, reading live weather feeds. Tank paced like a caged bull, his jaw tight. The mountain air seemed to hum with expectation, as if it too waited for something unseen. They fired again. Ramirez first. His round smacked low, swallowed by the rock wall below the compound. Tank's shot caught an updraft, arcing high into nothingness. Deadeye's bullet passed within 2 feet of the target before the wind snatched it away. Martinez cursed under his breath as another gust ruined his trajectory. Each miss scraped their confidence raw. "Physics hates us today," Jackson muttered. "Physics doesn't care," Deadeye replied grimly. Tank forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Guess Princess isn't even going to try." Sophia, sitting cross-legged near the edge, didn't react. Her notebook lay open across her lap, pages filled with neat handwriting, formulas, sketches of wind spirals, notes on temperature gradients. She watched the distant flag atop the compound, how it whipped erratically, then paused, always on the same beat, every 90 seconds. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. "It's breathing." Ramirez caught the words. "What?" "The mountain," she said, looking up. "It's breathing. The wind isn't random, it's cycling." Deadeye frowned, following her gaze. He watched the flag, the dust plumes, the shimmer of heat. Slowly he saw it, the pattern hidden in chaos. Tank scoffed, "You're hearing ghosts in the wind." But even as he mocked, a sliver of doubt slid into his voice. Sophia traced a finger along her notes. Every 90 seconds the gusts align. 4.7 seconds of stability before chaos again. It's like a heartbeat. 4.7 seconds, Deadeye echoed. She nodded. "Enough time for a bullet if you listen." The seals exchanged uneasy glances. Tank crossed his arms. "You're saying all of us missed because we weren't patient enough to what? Ask permission from the mountain." Sophia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Another round of shots followed, each man timing his best guess at a lull. Each bullet failed. The wind was merciless to pride and precision alike. Tank slammed his Barrett's bolt forward with more force than necessary. "This is ridiculous. No one can thread that needle." Deadeye exhaled through his teeth, frustration bleeding into resignation. No one has yet. Ramirez watched Sophia, who had not moved. Her eyes stayed locked on the horizon, following invisible lines only she could see. He remembered Afghanistan, a narrow canyon, and a young Marine corporal who'd once waited 6 minutes before taking a shot, because the wind had whispered that patience mattered more than orders. Ramirez had thought her reckless then. Now he wondered if she'd simply been right. As the sun climbed higher, heat waves distorted the valley. Martinez called out temperature readings. Jackson read barometric shifts. None of it changed the mountain's rhythm. Sophia rose finally, dusting grit from her knees. Not today. Tank spun toward her. Not today, you're giving up. She shook her head. I'm waiting. The word stung. Waiting felt like failure to men who defined themselves by action. Yet none of them could deny that every rushed shot had already failed. Back at the compound, tension simmered. Tank slammed his locker again, the sound echoing through the barracks. Deadeye sat in silence, replaying missed trajectories in his head. Martinez traced a finger over the satellite photo, staring at the impossible distance. Ramirez lingered outside under the stars. The desert was quieter now, the wind a gentle sigh against the canyon walls. He thought about command's orders, about the unspoken weight in the folder on his desk. Something about Sophia Chun had prompted someone far above him to test not just skill but faith. Faith that sometimes the quietest soldier carried the sharpest edge. Sophia, in her small, hot quarters, disassembled her rifle again. Each part gleamed under her lamp. She inspected, polished, reassembled, then sat staring out the window at the dark horizon. She thought of the embassy, the smoke curling into a cobble sky, the faces of the fallen, the promise she'd made silently over the rubble. She whispered to the night, "You don't get to walk away again, Al-Rashid." The desert didn't answer. It didn't need to. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the mountain breathed, waiting. The next day would be different. She felt it in her bones, in the way the wind paused just long enough to stir hope. What was she seeing in the chaos that the others could? The morning sun painted the canyon walls in fire and gold, but the wind was merciless, gusting, twisting, carving invisible rivers through stone. Dust hissed against boots and rifles as the SEALs assembled once more on the cliffside platform. Pride had been replaced by quiet determination. The mountain had already humbled them. Deadeye studied his weather tablet, fingers tapping nervously. Tank muttered curses under his breath, but even his bluster sounded weary. Martinez stared across the valley, the distant compound a speck almost lost in the shimmering heat. Chief Ramirez paced slowly, the weight of command pressing on his shoulders. Command's orders were simple: prove capability under impossible conditions. But beneath that, Ramirez sensed something unspoken, that this wasn't just about a shot. It was about what men believed possible, and what they doubted in others. Sophia knelt near the edge, her rebuilt rifle across her lap. Her notebook lay open beside her, pages fluttering in the wind like anxious wings. She wrote quickly, small, neat calculations. Wind vectors at multiple altitudes, temperature gradients shifting by the minute, barometric pressure fluctuations. Even the subtle Coriolis affect tugging the bullet's path. Tank watched her from the corner of his eye, unease creeping into his voice. She's, what, writing poetry about the breeze? Deadeye didn't answer. He'd seen her work the math before, seen the way her eyes tracked currents no one else noticed. He'd been on enough deployments to know the difference between showmanship and mastery. Sophia's breathing slowed. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened, not to the SEALs, not even to Ramirez's low-voiced commands, but to the mountain. The gusts had a rhythm, fierce surges followed by soft lulls, chaos folding briefly into order. It wasn't magic. It was pattern most shooters couldn't sit still long enough to find. A memory surfaced. Montana winters, snow crunching under boots, her grandfather kneeling beside her on a ridge. "The world will always look louder than it is," he'd said. "Quiet your mind. Watch long enough and the truth will show itself." She opened her eyes. The truth was showing itself now. When Ramirez called the next rotation, the seals went again. Ramirez's shot, low and left. Tank, overcorrected high. Dead eyes, close but still carried off by an invisible crosswind. Frustration rippled through the group. Impossible, Tank muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. Sophia's turn. She crawled forward, her movements deliberate, calm. The desert heat shimmered around her. Her cheeks settled against the stock, her fingers lightly touched the trigger. Through the scope, the observation deck seemed impossibly small, barely more than a mirage on the horizon. She didn't fire, not yet. Instead, she watched the distant flag. Its frantic whipping slowed, then sped again. 90 seconds, again the same, 90 seconds. She whispered, 4.7 seconds of calm. The seals exchanged glances. Tank shifted uncomfortably. Martinez broke the silence. She's waiting for something, again. Ramirez raised a hand to quiet him. He'd seen this before, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, moments when a good shooter let instinct sharpen mathematics. The minutes stretched. Dust devils spun across the canyon floor. The air trembled with tension. Sophia scribbled one final note, then closed her notebook. Her hands moved like a ritual, adjusting her bipod, checking her scope alignment, chambering around. She could feel the mountain's breath steadying, feel her heartbeat sinking with it. But then gusts slammed unexpectedly through the valley, scattering dust and hope alike. The lull she'd been waiting for broke apart. She exhaled slowly, eased her finger off the trigger, and rolled onto her back. "Not yet," she said softly. Tank groaned in frustration. "Again? Are you kidding me? We're running out of time." Deadeye glanced at him. "You'd rather she miss." Tank clenched his jaw and said nothing. Back at the compound, a storm of unspoken feelings churned. Pride was wounded, nerves frayed. The clock ticked toward the narrow window when Halil al-Rashid was expected to appear. In the quiet of her storage room quarters, Sophia stripped and cleaned her rifle yet again. The motion soothed her. Each part gleamed under her lamplight, bolt, trigger, scope, barrel. The mountain's rhythm pulsed in her memory. 90 seconds. 4.7 seconds of order. Wait. She paused, staring at her hands. They were steady, but inside she felt the tremor of memory. Cobble, smoke curling above rubble, screams echoing in her ears. She'd been too far away to stop the blast, too late to save the lives that haunted her. This shot wasn't about pride or proving herself to 12 seals. It was about making the mountain's breath count for something more than physics. Outside, Tank sat alone under the stars. The bravado had drained from him. He thought about the way she'd extended her hand after throwing him, firm but without malice. He misjudged her, and the realization settled heavy on his chest. Ramirez watched from a distance, the ghost of a smile tugging at his weathered face. He'd seen operators break under smaller tests, but he'd also seen rare ones, quiet, resilient, who waited for the impossible and made it real. Sophia Chun might be one of them. The night deepened. The desert cooled. The wind's song shifted, hinting at tomorrow. Somewhere on a distant ridge, Halil al-Rashid's routine remained unbroken. He still believed himself safe, hidden by distance, protected by chaos. Sophia lay awake on her cot, rifle within reach, listening. Not just to the wind, but to her own heartbeat, steadying itself against the storm that was coming. Tomorrow the mountain would speak. She would be ready. Would the mountain grant her a single breath of order? The desert had never been so still or so alive. The sky burned cobalt and white as early afternoon sun hammered the ridges. Heat shimmered over Devil's Canyon, warping distances, bending light. The seals crouched on the cliffside platform, their rifles gleaming under a merciless sun. Every man had fired and failed. Pride was gone now, replaced by something quieter, hope, fear, awe. Tank paced, muttering, but the usual swagger had drained from him. Deadeye kept checking wind readings that shifted before his eyes. Martinez sipped water mechanically, jaw tight. Even Ramirez, a man forged in war zones, felt the weight of the moment press on him like gravity. At 13:58, Sophia stepped forward, her rebuilt rifle balanced in her arms. She didn't look at the men behind her. She didn't need their approval or their doubt. Her notebook rested closed in her vest, its equations and sketches burned into memory. The mountain's rhythm pulsed in her veins. The flag on the distant compound snapped violently, then stilled. 90 seconds. Sophia knelt, laid prone, and slid her cheek against the stock. The rifle felt like an extension of her heartbeat, steady, patient. Through the scope, the world narrowed, heat waves dancing, dust motes swirling, the observation deck a tiny balcony suspended between sky and stone. Tank tried for a joke, but his voice cracked. "No pressure, princess." She didn't respond. Her breathing slowed until it almost stopped. At 13:59:20, the gusts subsided briefly. She marked the cycle silently. One more. The next is the window. Ramirez stood behind her, eyes narrowed. He'd seen shooters falter at the edge of greatness, flinch, rush, let ego dictate timing. Sophia did none of that. She waited, an apex predator coiled but still. The valley's chaos settled for a heartbeat. Then the gusts surged again. Sophia adjusted her scope by half a click, so slight it looked like a nervous tick. She inhaled, exhaled, let her body sink deeper into the earth. The final lull approached. 90 seconds had never felt so long. At 14:00:00, Halil al-Rashid stepped onto his observation deck. Tall, bearded, wrapped in white robes, his daily ritual unaware that death was already in flight. Through Sophia's scope, he was a fragile shape of flesh and arrogance. She thought of Kabul, the embassy's shattered walls, the faces of friends buried under rubble, the promises she had whispered to ghosts. Her pulse steadied. The wind softened, 4.7 seconds. She exhaled into the natural pause between breaths. Her heartbeat slowed. She saw not just the target but the invisible highway of air between them, every crosswind, every thermal column, every whisper of the mountain's breath. Her finger closed on the trigger. The rifle cracked, a single thunderclap swallowed by canyon walls. For 3 seconds the bullet flew, a streak of disturbed air bending through invisible chaos. At 500 meters it danced along a thermal edge. At 1,000 it rode a narrow corridor of calm. At 1,500 gravity pulled, wind tugged, the Earth's rotation nudged, and still it held. The SEALs tracked the vapor trail through spotting scopes, eyes wide, breath held. The desert itself seemed to pause. At 2.8 seconds, Halil al-Rashid stiffened. The bullet struck center mass, driving him backward into the balcony's shadow. For a moment, the white of his robe fluttered like a torn flag, then crumpled out of sight. Silence. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, even the wind seemed stunned. Tank's jaw went slack. Deadeye blinked once, twice, as if the image might resolve differently. Martinez whispered, "Holy," but the word withered. Ramirez stepped forward slowly, lowering his binoculars. His hands trembled, a man who'd witnessed decades of war but had rarely seen a miracle. He reached up, unclipped the SEAL trident from his vest, and pinned it quietly to Sophia's chest. The metal caught the sun, a glint of respect heavy with meaning. The sound of it clicking into place broke the spell. Tank approached, his shadow falling long across the platform. His voice was hoarse. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. He extended a calloused hand. Sophia took it, firm, steady, no triumph in her eyes, only relief. The others followed, murmurs of awe and congratulations echoing across the cliff. Deadeye shook his head. "I've made impossible shots," he said quietly. "But that wasn't just shooting." Sophia shook her head slightly. "It wasn't magic, it was the mountain." They packed their gear in silence, each man turning inward, humbled. Tank, once eager to mock, was now her loudest advocate. He turned to the others. "You tell anyone about today, and you tell them she did it." The descent back to the compound was subdued. The desert, having borne witness, seemed to hum with a strange serenity. That night around a small fire near the barracks, the SEALs gathered. There were no crude jokes, no easy bravado. Deadeye raised a tin cup in a quiet toast to the little wolf who made the mountain speak. Sophia didn't drink to the praise. She drank to the memory of Kabul, to the faces that would never come home, and to a grandfather's voice carried on canyon winds. Somewhere far away, command received the report. Within 48 hours, new orders would arrive. A classified assignment, a new code name whispered in the dark. But for now, under the indifferent stars, Sophia sat with men who finally saw her, not as a token or a test, but as the operator who had just rewritten the limits of what they believed possible. She didn't speak much that night. She didn't need to. Dignity doesn't shout, it waits, it acts, and it lets the echoes speak for themselves. How does a single moment rewrite a lifetime of doubt? The desert was quiet again, but it was a different quiet, less cruel, less mocking. Dawn stretched pale fingers across Devil's Canyon as the SEALs prepared to pack up the observation post. The shot had already traveled farther than anyone thought possible, yet its echoes lingered in the men's posture, their softened voices, their newly tempered pride. Tank stood at the edge of the platform, Barrett slung over his shoulder. He watched the valley below without his usual bravado. For the first time since Sophia arrived, he didn't need words to fill the air. Respect had made him quiet. Deadeye was still replaying the shot in his head, searching for an explanation. "I measured everything," he murmured to Martinez. "I calculated every variable, but she saw something we didn't." "She listened," Martinez replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe that's the part we always miss." Ramirez closed his binoculars with a soft click. "The shot isn't what matters," he said quietly. "It's what it revealed." Sophia crouched by her rifle, sliding it carefully into its case. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, as if she were packing away more than a weapon, packing away a piece of the mountain's breath. She glanced once toward the distant compound where Halil al-Rashid's balcony now stood empty. Justice delivered. Promises kept. Ghosts, perhaps, finally at rest. As they hiked back to the compound, the men walked in a loose formation. The previous day's walls of ego eroded. Tank carried some of her gear without being asked. Deadeye slowed his pace to walk beside her, though he didn't speak. The canyon's harsh terrain felt softer now, its ridges and gullies less like obstacles and more like silent witnesses. Back at base, command's transmission came through before dawn faded. Ramirez read the orders twice, then handed the paper to Sophia. The words were simple. Staff Sergeant Sophia Chun is hereby reassigned to a classified sniper program under Special Operations Command, effective immediately. She read the message without outward reaction, though a subtle tremor in her hands betrayed the weight of it. Tank broke the silence first. "So, they're taking you." His voice carried no sarcasm, only a reluctant pride. "Figures, no one else could have done what you did." Martinez chuckled softly. "Guess we'll be bragging about training with a legend now." Sophia closed the paper and handed it back to Ramirez. "It wasn't me alone," she said. "The mountain had its say." Ramirez gave a small nod, a flicker of a smile tugging at the corner of his weathered mouth. Maybe, but someone still had to listen. They shared a final meal together. No ceremony, no speeches. Just operators eating in a dusty mess hall, laughter returning in small, hesitant doses. Even Tank, between bites, admitted, "You threw me like a sack of laundry and I deserved it." The table erupted in quiet laughter. Sophia allowed herself a small smile. That night she packed her duffel. The storage room that had once felt like a deliberate insult now seemed almost familiar, a place where the mountain's whispers had begun to align. Walsh, the armorer, stopped by as she zipped her bag. He rested a weathered hand on the doorframe. "Didn't think I'd see the day," he said. "A busted M24 rebuilt into legend." Sophia shrugged lightly. It was never the rifle. Walsh gave her a rare, approving nod. You're right, it never is. Under a sky heavy with stars, she walked the perimeter one last time. The razor wire hummed faintly in the wind. Beyond the ridges, the mountain loomed, indifferent yet oddly companionable. She closed her eyes and heard her grandfather's voice. Patience, little wolf. Precision over pride. Let the world reveal itself before you act. She whispered into the dark, I kept my promise. Somewhere far away, the news of Halil al-Rashid's death began to ripple through the shadows of the world. Somewhere, families slept safer, unaware of the quiet calculation, the long wait, the perfect breath that had made it possible. The transport helicopter arrived before dawn. As its blades spun up, kicking dust across the tarmac, the SEALs gathered to see her off. Tank stepped forward first, extending a hand once more. This time, his grip was firm but warm. Don't forget to tell them who trained you, he said with a grin that was equal parts humility and pride. I'll tell them the mountain trained me, she replied. Deadeye offered a small salute. Martinez simply nodded, words unnecessary. Ramirez stepped close, his voice low enough for her alone. Remember, the shot was never about the distance. It was about proving that some things can't be measured. She nodded once, climbed into the helicopter, and shouldered her rifle case. As the bird lifted off, the compound shrank below, towers, barracks, and the cliffside platform where a group of men had learned to see beyond their prejudice. The canyon opened beneath her like a scar across the earth, but to Sophia it looked like a path, hard, winding, unforgiving, but leading somewhere worth going. She watched until the mountain disappeared behind clouds of dust and distance. Later, on a different continent, her name would become a whisper among operators. Some would call her a legend, a ghost, a miracle worker of ballistics. But Sophia would remember the sound of Tank's apology, the weight of Ramirez's trident on her vest, and the whispering wind over Montana ridges. Because in truth, the shot was never just about a kill. It was about redemption for Kabul, for the faces she couldn't save, for every quiet moment when doubt tried to drown her. It was about proving, to herself most of all, that dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard. Months later, on a training range hidden in another mountain range far from Devil's Canyon, Sophia would guide a young sniper in training. The girl would ask how she had made that impossible shot. Sophia would only smile faintly and point toward the horizon. You wait, she'd say. You listen. And when the world finally breathes, you don't hesitate. Somewhere on a windswept ridge in Montana, a grandfather's spirit would smile. And in quiet corners of the military world, where stories are traded like contraband, men who once mocked her would lower their voices and tell of the day they saw the mountain speak, through a woman they had underestimated. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.